There is a mistake in the history of medicine that was rewarded with a Nobel Prize, held its ground for 70 years, and was finally broken by a man floating weightless inside a laboratory in orbit. The mistake was not about the heart, it was not about the lungs, it was about the organ that tells you which way is down. That organ sits inside solid bone, behind and slightly above the opening of your ear, and the whole of it is smaller than a pea. Most people have never been told its name. It runs every second you are awake, and most of the seconds you are asleep. It never sends a bill in the form of pain. When it begins to fail, it does not hurt, it does not ring, it does not go dark. It gets quieter. The brain covers for it. And the covering is so good that the failure can run for 20 years without ever announcing itself, until the lights go out. Almost everyone who has reached their 60s has already had the demonstration and did not recognize it for what it was. Standing in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning, one hand going out for the wall without any decision being made to reach for it. That hand is not a habit. That hand is a report from a system that has lost part of its input and is asking another system for help. Here is the question that stayed open in medicine for the better part of a century. The eye has a lens, and light goes into it, and that is visible on a dissecting table. The ear has a drum, and sound moves it, and that is visible too. But balance has no obvious door. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. A person who is spinning feels the spin with total certainty, and there is no organ on the outside of the body doing the feeling. For most of the 19th century, dizziness was treated as a disease of the brain or of the stomach or of the nerves in general. Some physicians thought it came from the blood. Some thought it came from the gut. A patient who staggered in the dark was a patient with weak nerves. Then, in 1861, a French physician named Prosper Ménière published a description of a patient who had died after violent attacks of vertigo and deafness. And at autopsy, the damage was not in the brain at all, it was in the inner ear. That single case moved the question into the right building. It did not answer it. Nobody could see the thing working. The inner ear is buried in the densest bone in the human body, it is filled with fluid, and it stops working the moment you open it. So the question sat there. What is the organ? And how would anyone ever watch it run inside a living person? The answer came from a man with a limp, in a Vienna clinic, using a syringe of water meant for something else entirely. Robert Bárány was born in Vienna in 1876. As a boy, he developed tuberculosis in the bone of his knee. The joint stiffened and never fully bent again, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He could not run with other children. He read instead, and he went into medicine, and by his late 20s he was working at the ear clinic in Vienna under Adam Politzer, who was then the most respected ear surgeon in Europe. The clinic was not a research institute. It was a room where people came in with discharging infected middle ears in the years before antibiotics existed. The standard treatment was mechanical. A nurse or a junior doctor filled a large metal syringe with water, sat the patient down, and flushed the ear canal out to clear the debris. It was done dozens of times a day. It had been done for decades. It was the medical equivalent of washing a floor. And the patients complained. Not about pain, about the room moving. This was known. Everyone who had ever irrigated an ear knew that some patients got dizzy, and the accepted view was that this was an irritation, a nuisance, a side effect of poking around near a sensitive place. Bárány did what almost nobody had done. He stopped treating the side effect as noise and started treating it as a signal. The first thing he noticed was the eyes. When a patient became dizzy during irrigation, the eyes did something specific and repeatable. They drifted slowly to one side, then snapped back fast in the other direction. Drift, snap. Drift, snap. The movement is called nystagmus, and it is the brain trying to hold a stable picture of the world while being told the head is turning when it is not. He did not need a machine to see it. He needed to look at the patient's face instead of at the ear he was working on. The second thing came from a complaint. One patient told him the water was too cold, so he warmed it, and when the water was warmer than the body instead of cooler, the eyes did not stop. They reversed. The drift went the other way, and the snap went the other way, from the same ear, from the same syringe, with nothing changed but the temperature. That reversal is the entire discovery in one observation. A nuisance does not reverse direction when you warm it. a mechanism does. From there, Bárány turned a cleaning procedure into an instrument. He fixed the volume of water and the time it ran. He fixed the temperatures, one clearly below body temperature and one clearly above. He timed how long the eye movement lasted after the water stopped, in seconds, and he wrote the seconds down. Left ear against right ear, cold against warm. 4 numbers for every patient. Then he tilted their heads. This is the part that made it science rather than a clever trick. Bárány reasoned that if the water was producing its effect through gravity, then changing the angle of the head relative to gravity should change the response in a predictable way. So he laid patients back, sat them up, tipped them to the side, and repeated the same irrigation at the same temperature. The response changed exactly as the geometry predicted. In one head position, the reaction was strong. Tilt the head so that the structure he had in mind lay flat, and the reaction faded almost to nothing. He had found a way to test one part of the balance organ on one side of the head in a living, talking person using warm and cool water and a stopwatch. Nobody had ever been able to do that. Within a few years, the caloric test, as it came to be called, was being used across Europe to work out which ear was damaged before anybody opened anything. His explanation was elegant, and it was mostly about physics rather than biology. Deep in the bone, alongside the coil of the cochlea, sit 3 curved tubes set at angles to one another, the semicircular canals. They are filled with fluid. At the base of each one there is a soft flap that runs across the tube like a swinging door, with sensory hair cells at its root. When the head turns, the fluid lags behind, pushes the flap, bends the hairs, and the nerve fires. That is how rotation is detected. Bárány's claim was this: cool water in the ear canal cools the bone next to the outermost of those tubes. The fluid on the cooled side becomes slightly denser and sinks. Fluid on the far side is warmer and rises. A slow circulation begins inside the tube, the same circulation you get in a pan of water heated at one edge. And that circulation pushes the flap and bends the hairs and produces exactly the eye movement of a head turn that never happened. Warm the water instead of cooling it, and every arrow in that description reverses. So does the nystagmus. Convection. That was the answer. It explained the reversal, it explained the timing, and above all, it explained the head tilt result, because convection needs gravity, and gravity depends on which way the tube is pointing. The Nobel Committee agreed. In 1915, the prize in physiology or medicine for the year 1914 was awarded to Robert Bárány for his work on the physiology and pathology of the vestibular apparatus. He was not there to hear it. The First World War had begun. He had gone to the front as a surgeon in the Austro-Hungarian army, and he had been captured by the Russians at the fortress of Przemysl. The announcement reached him in a prisoner of war camp. He was released the following year after diplomatic intervention that involved the Swedish royal family and the Red Cross, and he traveled to Stockholm to accept a prize he had won while a prisoner. He spent the rest of his career in Uppsala and died in 1936. And his explanation stood, unchallenged and taught to every ear specialist in the world for the next 70 years. Then, somebody took the test off the planet. In 1983, the Space Shuttle Columbia carried a pressurized laboratory called Space Lab into orbit, and among the experiments on board were vestibular studies performed by the crew on each other. One of them repeated the caloric test in weightlessness. The logic of the check is clean enough that a school child can follow it. Convection is fluid moving because denser fluid sinks. Sinking requires gravity. In orbit, in continuous free fall, there is effectively no sinking. Nothing is heavier than anything else. So if Bárány was right, the response should have disappeared. It did not disappear. The nystagmus was still there in weightlessness. Reduced, altered, but present, and reversing with temperature exactly as it does on the ground. The results were published in the mid-1980s, and they did something unusual to a Nobel Prize. They did not overturn it. They amputated part of it. Convection is real. On the ground, it is probably the largest single contributor to the response, which is why the head tilt experiment worked so well and looked like proof. But it cannot be the whole mechanism, because the whole mechanism does not need gravity. There is a direct effect of temperature on the sensory cells and their nerve fibers, and there is a small expansion and contraction of the fluid itself as it warms and cools, and those pieces keep working when weight is taken away. Here is why that matters far more than a footnote in a textbook, and it is the reason this story is worth 30 minutes of anyone's evening. The caloric test measures one thing. It measures the outermost of the three tubes, the horizontal canal, on one side, and almost nothing else. Bárány built the most influential instrument in the history of balance medicine, and it examined roughly 1/6 of the organ. The part it never touched is the part that fails first with age. Underneath and between the three tubes sit two small chambers, the utricle and the saccule. Together they are called the otolith organs, and their job is not rotation. Their job is gravity and straight-line movement. The utricle lies roughly flat and senses tilting and horizontal acceleration. The saccule stands roughly vertical and senses up and down. Inside each chamber there is a patch of sensory tissue about the size of a grain of rice, carrying tens of thousands of hair cells. Counts made in human temporal bones put roughly 33,000 of them in the utricle and around 19,000 in the saccule. On top of those hair cells lies a soft jelly membrane, and on top of the jelly lies the thing that makes the whole system work. Crystals, actual crystals of calcium carbonate, between 3 and 30 microns across, packed in their thousands across the surface of the jelly like a bed of coarse sand poured onto a mat of set gelatine. They are called otoconia, which means ear dust, and they have one property that makes them useful. They are dense. Calcium carbonate is roughly 2 7/10 times the density of the fluid around it. That density difference is the whole reason you know which way is down. When your head tilts, the crystal bed is heavier than everything around it, so it lags and slides a fraction of a millimeter downhill, the jelly shears. The hair cells underneath are bent. The nerve fires, and the message that arrives in the brainstem is not a thought or a feeling. It is a physical readout of the angle of your skull against the gravitational field of the Earth, updated continuously, accurate to a fraction of a degree, and it arrives fast. The reflex that stabilizes your eyes from vestibular input starts moving the eye within about 10 milliseconds. Vision correcting an error takes something closer to 100. 10 against 100. That gap is why you can read a road sign while walking, and why a video shot while walking is unwatchable. Now the part that concerns a body that has been alive for 6 or 7 decades. Those crystals are not permanent, and they are not maintained the way bone is maintained. Studies of human inner ears removed after death, examined under electron microscopy, show otoconia that are pitted, fractured, thinned, and fused, and the amount of that damage rises with the age of the person. The saccule takes it worse than the utricle. Some of the crystals are gone entirely. What is left is a bed with holes in it. The hair cells go too. Counts across the adult lifespan show a steady decline in the sensory cells of both the maculae and the canals, beginning around midlife and continuing steadily, with losses in the canal patches running higher than in the otolith patches. The nerve cells that carry the signal, sitting in a cluster called the vestibular ganglion, decline as well, at a rate estimated at around 3% per decade. None of this hurts. None of it produces a symptom you could name. You lose a small percentage of a signal every year, and the brain, which is very good at this, simply weights the remaining inputs more heavily. There are 3 inputs to standing upright. The inner ear reports gravity. The eyes report the position of the room. The nerves in the soles of the feet, the ankles, and the joints report the pressure and angle of the body against the ground. 3 cables, holding 1 bridge. Fray one slowly enough, and the other 2 take the load, and the bridge does not sag, and nobody inspects anything. Which means the loss is invisible in daylight, on a firm floor, with the eyes open. Exactly the conditions in which balance is normally tested. Take 1 cable away and the whole picture changes. For most of the 20th century, there was no way to check any of this in a living person. The caloric test could not reach the otolith organs. Nothing could. A structure the size of a grain of rice, sealed in the hardest bone in the body, doing its work in silence, and the only evidence of its condition was whether somebody eventually fell over. That changed in the last decade of the century, and it changed through a strange back door. In 1992, 2 researchers working in Sydney, John Kolobach and Michael Halmagyi, reported that a loud click delivered into one ear produced a brief, measurable dip in the electrical activity of the large muscle running down the front of the neck on that same side, not a sound response. A muscle response, appearing within about 13 thousandths of a second, far too fast to be anything but a reflex, and it survived in people who were completely deaf in that ear. The reason is evolutionary leftover. The saccule began life in fish as a sound detector before it was ever a gravity detector, and it has never entirely lost the sensitivity. A loud enough click still shakes it, and the saccule has a direct connection to the muscles that hold up the head. So, a click goes in, and a twitch comes out of the neck, and the size of that twitch is a report on the condition of an organ nobody can see. The measurement is called the vestibular evoked myogenic potential, and it did something uncomfortable. Amplitude falls steadily from midlife onward, and in a substantial share of people past the age of 70, the response cannot be recorded at all, not weak, absent. The same period produced a second tool, one that needs no equipment beyond a pair of hands. A clinician holds the head, tells the patient to keep their eyes locked on a fixed target, and turns the head a small distance very fast. If the reflex is intact, the eyes stay locked on the target. If that side is weak, the eyes are dragged off the target and have to jump back, and the jump is visible from a foot away. Bárány needed a syringe, a stopwatch, and a cooperative patient. That test needs about 2 seconds. And there is a third method, cruder than either, that anybody has already performed on themselves without knowing it. This is where a person can find their own honest number, and it is measured the same way researchers measure it. In the United States, a national health survey between 2001 and 2004 included a balance test on thousands of adults. Stand with the feet together, arms folded, first on a firm floor, then on a thick foam pad, first with the eyes open, and then with the eyes closed. The foam degrades the information coming from the feet. Closing the eyes removes vision. On foam with the eyes closed, the inner ear is nearly alone. More than a third of American adults over the age of 40 failed that condition. In the group over 70, the failure rate was far higher again. And among those who had noticed symptoms, the odds of having fallen in the previous year were around 12 times higher. The foam and the darkness are not the danger, they are the reveal. The danger is that ordinary life is full of moments that quietly do the same thing. A bathroom at night with no light on, getting out of the shower with water in the eyes and a wet tile underfoot, deep carpet, wet grass, a dark stairwell, turning your head to look for a car while stepping off a curb, which removes the visual reference for about a second at exactly the moment your foot is between surfaces. Consider whether any of this is already familiar. Reaching for the wall in a dark hallway without deciding to. Feeling briefly unsure when you tip your head back to reach a high shelf. A short swimming sensation when you roll over in bed. Preferring the handrail on stairs going down more than going up. Standing still in the shower when you close your eyes to rinse, because moving while they are shut does not feel right. Each of those is the same event. Vision or foot pressure has been reduced, and what is left underneath has less signal than it used to have. There is one more consequence worth naming, because it is common, it is frightening, and its cause is now obvious. Some of the crystals that break loose from the utricle do not simply vanish. They drift into one of the semicircular canals, where nothing is supposed to be dense. Once inside, they move under gravity every time the head changes position, and they drag fluid with them, and they bend the flap that is only supposed to respond to rotation. The result is a violent spinning sensation lasting under a minute, reliably triggered by lying down, rolling over, or looking up. It is the single most common cause of vertigo in older adults, and it is mechanical. It is loose crystals in the wrong tube. It is also, in trained hands, often correctable in a single visit by a sequence of head positions, which is why anybody experiencing it should be assessed rather than waiting it out. The stakes rise from there, and they rise in a loop rather than a line. Reduced balance signal leads to caution. Caution leads to less walking, less turning of the head, less time on uneven ground. But the two remaining cables, the eyes and the sensation from the feet and ankles, are trained by exactly the movement that caution removes. The system that is compensating for the loss is itself weakened by the response to the loss. Now the honest accounting, because parts of this are solid and parts of this are not. Well established, the otolith organs exist and work by the mechanism described. Otoconia degrade with age in human tissue. Vestibular hair cells and vestibular nerve cells decline across adult life. The caloric test measures only one canal. The caloric response persists in weightlessness, so convection alone cannot explain it. Loose otoconia cause positional vertigo. Poor performance on foam with eyes closed is associated with a much higher rate of falls. Plausible, but not proven, that regularly asking the vestibular system to work, by narrowing the base of support and reducing visual input under safe conditions, slows the functional decline in a healthy older adult. Balance training does improve balance test scores and reduces falls in trials. Whether that improvement is happening in the ear, in the brainstem's weighting of the inputs, or purely in the muscles and reflexes, is not settled. The honest answer is that the brain's reweighting is the most likely site of the gain. Preliminary only, there is early research linking low vitamin D and reduced bone density to repeated attacks of positional vertigo, and one trial suggesting supplementation reduced recurrences in people who were deficient. That is interesting, it is not settled, and it is a blood test and a conversation with a physician rather than something to act on from a video. Inference from physics rather than measurement, the exact share of everyday balance carried by the otolith organs at any given age. It cannot be measured in a living person doing normal things. So what does the body actually need here? The vestibular system was built to receive a particular input, and that input is movement of the head through space, with the visual scene not doing the work. It was designed on foot, on uneven ground, in changing light. It is not receiving much of that in a flat, carpeted, well-lit house. The general principle used in vestibular rehabilitation is simply to reduce the crutches, briefly and safely, so the ear is asked to contribute again. In practice, that means standing with a hand within reach of a solid surface, bringing the feet closer together than usual, and closing the eyes for a short count before opening them. It means turning the head slowly from side to side while keeping the eyes on one fixed point. It means walking on grass or gravel rather than only on smooth floor, and going up and down stairs in daylight while consciously reducing the grip on the rail rather than the other way round. Every one of those is a request sent to a quiet organ. The important part is that the request is made near a counter, a door frame, or a wall, and never near a stairwell, glass, or a hard corner. Two limitations, stated plainly. First, this mechanism explains a slow, symmetrical, silent decline. It does not explain everything. Vertigo that arrives suddenly and severely, dizziness accompanied by new hearing loss on one side, double vision, weakness on one side of the body, difficulty speaking, or a severe headache unlike any before, is a different situation entirely and belongs in front of a doctor immediately rather than in front of a video. Second, anyone taking medication that lowers blood pressure, anyone with a history of fainting, anyone with significant neck disease, anyone recovering from a stroke, and anyone who has already fallen in the past year should have their balance assessed by a physician or a physical therapist before deliberately taking vision out of the equation, even for a few seconds. Nothing here is a diagnosis or a treatment. It is a description of an organ, and what any of it means for one particular body is a conversation with a clinician who can examine that body. One question is still open, and it is not a small one. In some animals, otoconia are not simply laid down once and left to erode. There is evidence that they are maintained, dissolved, and rebuilt, with calcium moving in and out of them across life, and that after damage a degree of repair takes place. Whether anything comparable happens in an adult human ear, whether that bed of crystals is a structure that is being quietly maintained and could in principle be maintained better, or whether it is simply issued at birth and worn down like the tread on a tire, has not been answered. Robert Bárány found a way to interrogate one tube out of 6 with a syringe of warm water and got most of the way to an answer that took a spaceflight to correct. The organ he could not reach is the one keeping you upright in a dark hallway tonight, sliding a bed of crystals, a fraction of a millimeter downhill, 30 times a second, without ever once mentioning it.